freedom. I want to actually feel more free that I'm in a relationship than if I'm single. And I'm not talking about sleeping with other people or dating other people. It's not about that. It's about, can I still feel free to pursue my passions, the things that light me up, and have support in the relationship that the relationship container itself will support that. Once we kind of really got clear on that, our relationship just really started to up level. You love to do this and you love to do this. How can I help you? And what that does is when you're able to bring in those passions and optimize yourself in these areas that are outside, you get to bring a fuller piece. I get to bring a fuller Scott into the relationship. And that was really huge.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Scott Berry with us. Scott is a professional and relationship coach who's helped couples and professionals for the last 12 years optimize their life and relationships towards self-actualization. He's the founder of the Self-Actualized Marriage program, a podcast host, an entrepreneur, traveler, and tech geek. And he has 3 hairless cats. Scott, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So we know each other from Mastermind, a Brotherhood called Metal. We have a number of shared friends and colleagues. You were in Metal. Are you still in there?
I am not, but I will say that Metal and just anything that brings together a collection of inspiring men, I think is so underrated. I think as men that we desperately need to have men to be vulnerable with, and then to also have men that challenge us. And especially as we start to get into relationships, a lot of times we can kind of get lazy, if you will, because sometimes a lot of our social needs are met within the nuclear family. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't have to go out as much. And having a collection of really good guys to be able to rap with and just hang out with and just have a brotherhood, I think is so important. And so that's where I met you, just a really good group of guys.
Yeah. We met, I don't know how many years ago now, 8 maybe? 10?
Yeah, 7 or 8 or something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, time flies.
It does. Yes, it does.
So let's talk about how you got into this whole self-actualized marriage focus and how that came about.
Sure. So I started out doing individual counseling. That's what I'm trained on, doing one-on-one coaching, one-on-one counseling. And what I had found out coming up time and time again is a lot of the strains and the stresses that I was working primarily with men at that time, is they would be very successful, like in their business and other areas of their life, like with their body, but they would be struggling sometimes with their relationship. And what I had found was there was a thread that if someone's intimate relationship is not going well, it's really hard for people to find fulfillment and happiness in other pieces of their life. And so it just kind of got me down this rabbit hole of learning more about how to optimize relationships, different dynamics between men and women, masculine, feminine, and really studying all of the greats to figure out, okay, how do we really optimize a relationship? Because if your relationship, and this is just my personal opinion, that when your relationship is off, it's really hard to just be happy and to be fulfilled. Like you can have all these other successes in your life, but if your intimate relationship is off, it's almost like nothing else matters. It's like the core foundation. It's so critically important, especially nowadays when we put so much of our time and energy into our relationship, based on maybe 100, 200 years ago when there was a communal aspect that we used to live in where our partner would maybe be there for sex and for helping rear the children, but then you would get all of your other needs met through the other pieces of the community. Now there's so much emphasis placed on the relationship. So there's these higher expectations. Most of these expectations are not being met. And so that had just really kind of set me on the path to learn more about it. And I've just been really obsessed with it ever since.
So is this program that you've created, the Self-Actualized Marriage, is that with your wife, or is that something you teach and mentor people? You're just yourself?
It's just myself. So it's a program where I do one-on-one individual counseling with couples, like through coaching. And then we'd run a yearly retreat. This one's in September in Mill Valley in Northern California. And when I do my retreats, she's with me for the retreats. So I'll help lead a lot of the exercises, but then we'll do a lot of exercises where we're split the men and the women, and then she'll go ahead and she'll help with facilitate that. So it's mostly me, but then she kind of comes in and supports me with that.
Oh, cool. And how long have you been doing these retreats for?
So it started in, I think the first retreat was in 2019. Yeah, 2019. And we were able to do a few, and then the pandemic hit, and now we're just starting to roll them back out again.
Gotcha. Well, what would be some sort of typical or maybe prototypical transformation that you get from a retreat attendee or couple?
So we focus on a few things. I want every attendee, whether they're doing the retreat or they're working with me personally, is to walk away with a couple of things. One, with a roadmap on what they can do to make the relationship better. And then I want them to just have a feeling of excitement about the future of the relationship, right? I want them to be excited. Like, I'm so excited for the next few years with you and what we're able to build. And so I really want my couples to get clarity on like what it is that they need. Like, what do I want now? And then what do I want to build with you in the next 3 to 5 years? And then how do we align on that? And then get clear on your own needs and your own expectations. And then get clear on which of those needs can I get in the relationship? And then which of those needs can I get outside of the relationship? So often we are looking to have all of these needs met in the relationship, and it's kind of creating an unfair kind of level, or I would even call it a burden for the partner to kind of meet all of these needs, and it gets really, really heavy. So having them walk away with, oh, wow, I don't have to have my partner fulfill everything. Here are the things that I need. I'm clear about what I want. I'm clear about I want to create this business with you. I want to move. I want to travel around the world. I want to buy a new house. I want to, raise goats in the middle of Maine. I don't know what it is, but getting clear on that and then getting into alignment so you guys both have something to build. And so that's really what I want them to walk away with, a sense of excitement when they're leaving, when we're working together, and a roadmap to be just a little bit clearer on how they can attain that.
So any particular scenario that, feel free to anonymize it as much as you want, but any particular scenario that really sticks out for you, like, wow, this marriage was completely transformed, or the relationship was on the brink and got saved, or something like that, or anything you want to share about a particular scenario?
So I have one couple where the couple had been together for about 8 years. They've been married for 5.5, and there was an infidelity in the relationship. They were monogamous. They weren't open, not polyamorous, but they were monogamous. And one of the partners had cheated on them a few times. And so there was this kind of sense of betrayal from the other partner. And so they were first trying to figure out what to do with that, because prior to that, of course, they had some issues. They had a really happy marriage. Like, they were actually really happy. If we were to ask them before all that happened, or even right before it happened, they said, oh no, like, we love each other. And so you get a sense that there was a sense of connection and love and, respect for the most part, except for that one area. What they had to do is they had to get really clear on, what do I need in this relationship if I'm going to continue? What do I need to feel safe, to feel secure? And then for the person who was actually creating the adultery, what is it that I need to feel alive, right? What was it that was maybe missing that kind of pushed me outside to kind of lie and be a little bit deceitful? And so we would work on that. And then with that relationship, what we had to do was we almost had to have a ceremony to honor the death of that relationship. And so we're going to go through 3 to 5 to 6 different marriages in our entire life. Sometimes they're going to be with the same person and sometimes they're not. But when you have something that is that shaken in the relationship, like an infidelity, like a death of a child, or something very emotional, that old relationship is basically dead. We have to make a decision. Okay, that one is dead. We need to honor that. We almost need to have a ceremony to say goodbye to that. And are we willing to rebuild, like willing to kind of move forward and rebuild a new path in a new relationship? And if the answer is yes, then we really have to let go of the old one to build the new one. And so you'll find these iterations of marriages as well when we have major life events. So a lot of times, if you've been, say, married for 6 years and you have a child, that next relationship you have with your partner is going to be pretty different than it is for your last one. And if we end up having the same expectations that we do from the previous marriage and we bring them into the next marriage, the marriage 2.0 or marriage 3.0, whatever you want to call it, we might set ourselves up for a little bit of conflict and a little bit of disappointment. So just getting a little bit clear on what we need. And so in that specific example, we had to really honor the death, make sure that we were both into creating something bigger, and then kind of go over, hey, this is what I need. This is what I need to feel safe. Here's what we need to go forward, and then create a roadmap from there.
That makes sense. Yeah. One of my past guests is Stephanie Sarazin. Her book is about ambiguous grief. So I don't know if you've ever heard that term. Have you heard of ambiguous grief?
I haven't, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So when you have clear loss that is kind of universally accepted, like you lose a spouse to accident or a fatal disease, you get support, hopefully, usually, right? The community comes together, the family and so forth, drop off food, they'll check in on you, they'll attend the funeral, all that. But if it's ambiguous grief, then it's like, well, you just have to get over it. Like, yeah, that's terrible that your spouse cheated on you, and that's life. You just got to buck up. It's like, where's the support? Where is the bringing hot meals and showing up for some sort of ceremony or something? No. So when ambiguous loss happens, you're left without a support system. So she writes about this in her book, Soul Broken, which is just really important for people to understand that there's ambiguous grief where it's not so clear cut, and thus you don't get the support and you get misunderstood and you get chided and chastised instead of loved on and hugged. It's very hard.
Yeah, it's interesting when there's a very obvious, almost societal accepted form of grief in which people will come together and say, hey, let me help you. And what do you need? But, grief can come from, you could have serious, heavy grief with the death of a cat who's 22 years old, and you're finding it hard just to get up and, make coffee in the morning. But society or friends are like, it was a 22-year-old cat. Why can't you get over it? But there's still something that you're actually processing. Yeah, that's really interesting. I can kind of understand that.
Yeah. Or let's say your parent, heaven forbid, has dementia or something. So they're there, but not really there. And so you're grieving this and nobody really is supporting you through this. It's hard.
We talked about metal and that kind of men's brotherhood that we were in earlier. The one thing that I can say is there's 3 aspects to a relationship. There's him, there's her, at least in a heterosexual relationship. And then there's the union that you guys have created together, this marriage, this partnership, whatever you want to call it. And we want to make sure that we are feeding each of those identities, right? Him, her, and the union. This is true for both partners, but especially for men, to have 1 or 2 guys that you could actually call in the middle of the night and actually be incredibly vulnerable with, and have someone that you can actually be able to talk to, that if you had this type of grief in your life, that they wouldn't question it. They would just be like, how can I help you? Do you just need to ear? Do you need some advice? What can I do for you? And that's really, really important. And it does 2 things. One, it kind of gives you a safety social net. And the other thing it doesn't put all of the heaviness on the other partner to be the support structure. It's really nice to be able to get an outside opinion and support that's outside the relationship, because nothing's going to trigger you more typically than your intimate partnership. And so by having a little bit of outside help, and no matter whatever you're going through, to have someone who's non-judgmental, just openly loving, and that you can actually be vulnerable with. And that's a really tricky thing for men, is to actually be authentically vulnerable with somebody. Women typically have a little bit of an easier time to be able to do that, but not always. But it's really important for both partners to be able to have that support system outside the relationship. I cannot stress that enough.
Yeah. So what does that support system look like? And if you don't have it, how do you get it?
To me, that support system is one or two really good friends. Just really good friends that you can just be authentic with, and to be able to feel comfortable enough to be able to share your shit. And I think how that happens is, if you don't already have that, having some friendships that are in your life, the ones that you're just feeling a little bit closer to. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So for people who you'd actually like to kind of cultivate that relationship with a little bit deeper, is be a little bit vulnerable. Share something that is maybe a little bit uncomfortable. You don't got to make it weird. You don't have to make it super uncomfortable, but just by sharing a little, hey, how you doing? How was your weekend? Instead of great, you can say, well, it was okay, but man, I really had this challenging thing. And you can just kind of explain it and just see where they are. And then you can kind of get the feedback and then just kind of play it from there. But I think just kind of baby steps of just being more authentic and vulnerable. And that's the hardest part, is just to be able to be a little bit more raw. And we're not used to it. Most people have not been taught, especially men, to be vulnerable, right? What I find in a lot of men that I work with is, a lot of times they'll end up in two camps. One is they end up being the nice guy, which they end up becoming a little bit of a pushover. And then the other side is they become kind of like the dominant leader, but they do it in a way that is a little bit machismo and a little bit domineering. And so finding that right balance to be a masculine leader, but to still be able to tap into your feminine, to still be in touch with your emotions, but you're still a leader, you're still decisive, you're still strong in who you are, that you can lead your woman, you can, do all of that great stuff, but you're still open, right? And just most of us as men have not been taught that. And a lot of us men haven't had very strong masculine father role models as well to be able to represent that. And so this is what I really appreciate about your podcast, is you have a lot of really thought leaders that are on there helping kind of pave the way for that, because it's definitely much needed. It's definitely much needed.
Yeah. But there's a balance. If you're trying to be vulnerable and authentic, and you're also oversharing in the process, then you can be doing damage to your relationship and to the amount of trust that you've built up with your spouse, your partner. So you got to be calibrating to what you're sharing and whether that is yours to share or not.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking about being authentic and being able to share, but kind of understanding what's sacred in the relationship, and still honoring, I guess, your partner in what would feel safe and what would they actually be comfortable with sharing. I also think, just to add on to that really quickly, is to have that conversation with your partner, just before you actually need that, that support of, hey, if I ever do need that support, what feels good to be able to share? I know sometimes it is a little bit uncomfortable to kind of like peel back the curtain on what's going on in a relationship. And I know that I've always been really guarded about that. I've got a tendency to always say, oh no, it's great. Things are going well. But when I am able to be able to kind of like share something vulnerable about a challenge in my relationship, I've always felt a lot better. And then when I feel better, I'm able to kind of process it. I'm able to come back into the relationship, a little bit less reactive and a little bit more open. So I think that's really important, just to say, hey, would it be okay to be able to share some of this, and what would feel good to you?
Yeah, I tend to overshare. So when I do that, sometimes I really upset my partner, and she's like, you shouldn't have shared that. And I need to be more thoughtful and careful about what I'm sharing. Just about me, then that's one thing. But if it's about the relationship or it's about her, then I need to be mindful.
Are you clear on what you can and can't share?
Pretty clear. Yeah. Yeah. We've worked on that.
Yeah. I mean, look, our relationship's going to be trial and error. It's great that you guys even have that awareness. I just find that most of the time it's men who just do not seek any type of support outside the relationship, and they just, and it's really hard to be able to. It's good to be able to have be able to vent and just kind of have that support system, because what men typically end up doing, and this is true for women as well, is we end up becoming very reactive in a very childlike state, or we just shut down and we just get very dismissive. So, and that's not going to move the relationship forward. The one thing that I will say, if you're in a relationship right now, this came as a as a nice little tidbit and relief to me, is that I think it was the Gottmans who I think you actually had on your program, if I remember correctly. They said that something around like 70% or 73% of all relationships, or all conflicts in a relationships, won't be solved. And I found that really interesting. And so if you kind of know that going in, that you're not necessarily going to resolve the conflict, but it's about how can you work together through the conflict and then find your compromise within that. Yeah, that makes me, at least that made me feel a little bit better, because it's like, wow, we didn't really fix that. It didn't come out to a perfect solution, but it's about progress and not perfection. It's just, how can we find a balance that works well for us?
Mm-hmm. So what's an example of a conflict that you're allowed to share, because you're not oversharing without permission, but something personal to your relationship where you have a conflict in relationship that isn't going to get solved?
So what's coming up for me right now? I've got a few, and I'm pretty good about being open about this, but money is a big thing for most relationships, right? We all have a different monetary blueprint that we bring to the table. I tend to be the saver of the relationship. She typically is the spender. She makes money, but she's also a spender. It's an interesting dynamic of where we find value in where we spend our money. Sometimes finding a compromise in between that. Like if we're going to go buy a hotel room, to me, I'm like, I'd rather have the cheapest thing possible, because to me, if it's not an experience, who cares, right? But if it's an experience, I'm more than happy to pay a ton of money. But she likes these, she likes these luxury hotels. And so how do we find that balance, right? Where if I'm going to be buying an alarm system or anything electronic, I want the best, right? That's where my value is. So finding that compromise, at least for us in monetary terms, is something that, we're always kind of dancing with.
How do you address that in a way that, even though it's not getting solved, you're reducing conflict and reducing resentment and the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as Dr. Gottman calls it? Yeah. Which are what? Contempt, criticism, resentment, stonewall.
Yep. Stonewalling and, like defensiveness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is explaining why you're coming from that angle. Here's why I think spending 400 nights on a hotel room that's just a nice hotel versus like an experience doesn't feel good to me, right? And tell me why it feels good to you, and then we can kind of go back and forth. I think just kind of explaining your side, as opposed to, you don't want to demonize the other side. And I think that's a really quick place in which a lot of us go to is, what's wrong with you? That makes no sense to spend that much money on that particular thing, right? As opposed to, hey, here's where I find value. Here's where I don't find value. Here's where I would love to maybe put that money. Here's where I'd like to allocate it. What would you like to do about it? And then just kind of have a discussion. But I think explaining why that is, coming from an I place versus a you place, and then just having that conversation. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing and being vulnerable.
Yeah, of course.
So earlier you were mentioning studying the greats, and I'm guessing it sounds like Dr. Gottman and the doctors Gottman, because there's two of them.
The doctors got, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, husband and wife. So who else would be considered greats in your opinion?
So the ones who, really have been moving me is A lot of my work on the self-actualized marriage is by a gentleman named Eli Finkel. He's got a great book called The All or Nothing Marriage, and I highly, highly recommend it. Of course, Esther Perel, Sue Johnson is really great. And I know this won't sound weird to you, but it may sound weird to a lot of people who are not familiar with his work. But Tony Robbins is fantastic when it comes to relationship work. And I know you've studied with him, but he's fantastic. David Data is great for learning about masculine and feminine dynamics. David Data can be a little bit triggering for some, but I really do appreciate his work, along with a good buddy of mine, John Weiland. I think if you start with those are all really good.
Gotcha. And what about Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages?
Yep. So funny. I was just about to bring that up. It's a little bit old school, but yeah, the 5 love languages are really key. And I will say, this is a personal thing for me, is understanding your partner's love language and then learning to reinforce how to appreciate that, especially if that love language is not your own. So my love language is acts of service. So I'll come home and Michelle will come home and I'll put up a picture for her. Like she ordered a picture and it's been kind of like sitting in the box for a while, and I'll put up the picture, and the first thing that I'll do when she gets home is like, hey, can I show you something? And I get really excited to be able to show her what I did. And they're like, see. And men, especially, like for any women listening out there, praise your man. Like really, really praise your man. Like the little things that we do, we live to get that little hero badge for that appreciation. Like it's fuel for us. Like we absolutely love it. And where I've seen a lot of relationships kind of come into disarray when there is not an appreciation for each of the other partners, and especially for men to not get that appreciation for just the little things that we do. And so getting back to the 5 love languages, my wife's love language is words of affirmation. And so for me, that's not mine, but I have to keep reminding myself to just the little things like, wow, you look really pretty today. Like, thank you for doing this. And like, oh, you look amazing, and things of that nature. And I forget, because I think she's such a beautiful woman, but I don't always vocalize it. And I need to vocalize my appreciation of her a hell of a lot more. And that's something that I'm always catching myself with, because it's not my innate love language. And so I just don't think about it. But whenever she gets her hair done, I want to make it a point to just notice it and appreciate it and honor it. And it's not vanity. It's just about appreciation. And she really appreciates that. And so for men, notice your woman, appreciate your woman. The feminine just loves to be appreciated. They really, really do. And noticed. They really want to feel noticed.
So what's your primary love language?
Acts of service. It's definitely acts of service. Yeah. It's, I love doing stuff for my woman. Like she'll come home and I'd be like, look, I just cleaned out your hard drive, right? I just updated your operating system. And, you know, that's not very sexy and it doesn't sound very sexy, but it's just like, I get so excited to do stuff for my queen. So it's definitely acts of service.
And you like receiving acts of service from her.
I do. Yeah. I do love receiving acts of service. Yeah.
So the 5 love languages are words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch, quality time. And what's the last one?
Oh, I'm blanking on the other one.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm blanking on it. Gifts. So this is really good. Her other love language, her secondary love language, is gifts. And what's really interesting is I used to be really critical with my wife on the gifts. And to a point where I'd almost get upset with her because she would get me little gifts all the time. And I didn't realize at the time that was her love language. And I would get frustrated because she would maybe get this little gift that, I don't know, that I would kind of appreciate. But then I'm like, this is just environmental trash. Like, I don't need any more clutter in my life. And I was failed to recognizing like that's her love language. And she was trying to just give me little things. Like she's always buying me little gifts, and she's always buying little gifts for friends. Like we'll meet up with friends and she'll create 10 little gift packs to give to people. And I've really appreciated that, because that is definitely not my love language. Like I almost kind of curl back a little bit and I don't like the consumerism of it. I don't like the environmental impact of it, but I forget that there is love that's kind of bundled in with that love language. And so I've really come to appreciate and be less critical, because I was critical of the gift giving aspect of her love language. And so, I'm glad you brought those up, because men, women, please try to recognize the love languages of your partner and to really appreciate them, especially if they're not your own. And typically they're not. And typically they're definitely different.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have
Are
to
you,
stretch
are you
outside
familiar
your
with your
comfort
love
zone.
language?
Oh yeah. Mine's physical touch. For Orion, it's gifts and acts of service.
It's hers gifts. Would you say gifts is number one or number two?
Yeah. Gifts is number one.
Okay.
Yeah. So if if there's this disconnect in how you convey your love to your partner in a way that you want to receive it, but not in the way that she wants to receive it, then, that's going to create a rift, or at least some discontent.
Well, we end up not feeling loved, right? We end up not feeling appreciated. We're not feeling loved when, if you really looked at it, you're like, wow, no, they actually are. It's just not the way that I'm used to receiving it. And so our filter, if you will, of all the data that's coming in, our reticular activating system, if you will, is able to receive those items, gifts, if you will, as love. When normally I would get gifts and I'm like, oh, it's appreciated, but I didn't see it as love. And now I see it as love.
That's good. That's a big step forward.
It is. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier the all or nothing marriage by Eli Finkel. So what is the concept or the premise there that makes it all or nothing?
So in his book, he really talks about, there's a few different, and I'm going to make this pretty concise, but there is an evolution of marriage. Marriage, for hundreds of years wasn't necessarily based on love. It was based on survival. It was having more kids, to a bigger family, if you will, to tend the farm and to create survival. And he talks a lot about the marriage as a hierarchy or a triangle. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it kind of fits into there, right? Where it goes physiological, and then it goes safety, and then it goes love, and then it goes success, and then it goes to self-actualization. And you have to meet the bottom rungs of the pyramid before you can kind of go up. And so the earlier days of marriage was mostly about fulfilling the bottom rungs of that pyramid, mostly for survival. And then once we got into the early 20th century, we started marrying for love versus like economics and food and safety and shelter and survival. And so it all became about love. And then as we started progressing, now what we're asking from our partner is not necessarily love, but I'm asking you to help me be my best possible version, my self-actualized person. It puts a really heavy emphasis and expectation on the other partner, because that's a lot to ask for. And so we're expecting our partner to step up to help us be our best self. And most relationships are falling short. And this is where a lot of my work kind of comes in. But he talks about how, if you can understand, if you're asking for, he calls it Mount Maslow, to be able to take your relationship to the top of Mount Maslow, is how to ask for these needs, how to kind of structure the relationship in a way that actually facilitates that. But most marriages right now, if you ask them to rate their relationship, like kind of like based on what their parents had or their previous parents had, if our grandparents, what you would consider to be a good relationship, that would be considered a terrible relationship now. So we're asking for a lot from our marriage. And so he talks a lot about the evolution of marriage and that aspect of it.
Gotcha. And why do you think that the divorce rate is on the rise, or has been for some decades now? What's the problem here that hopefully is fixable?
So what I see is, and from what I understand, is the divorce rate over the last few decades has actually kind of tapered off, right? It kind of hovers between 40 and 60%, right around that halfway mark. That actually hasn't shifted quite a bit. What's shifted is the level of satisfaction in the relationship. That has actually been going down over the last few years and over the last decade or so. And what I attribute to that is high expectations and not having those expectations met. So we're asking for a lot of this relationship, a lot more than we were in previous generations. And those expectations are not being met so from my understanding is that the divorce rate has actually been steady over the last few decades. It's basically hovered around halfway between 40 and 60%. What's really dropped is the satisfaction rate of marriages. Surveys that have been done over the last, say, 5, 10, maybe 15 years, is that you'll see a slow decrease in the rate of marital satisfaction or relationship satisfaction for long-term relationships. And that's typically due to the higher expectations that we are placing on relationships and not having those expectations met, right? It's kind of the core fundamental of happiness, right? Is when expectation doesn't meet reality. And so we are putting a really hard emphasis on being a little bit of our better self, our more self-actualized self. And we're kind of having these expectations for our partner to do that. And what has also been happening is over the last few decades, if not 100 years, is that we have gone from community and tribal living and tribal relationships to the nuclear family. And so a lot of our, where we would get our needs met is really concentrated into the relationship. And so we are asking just a lot from our partnerships, and we don't have the tools. We don't even also have the understanding of what's going on. So we have these subconscious high expectations of the relationship, but they're not being met. And a lot of times we don't know why that is, right? And so that's some of the work that I do, is getting clear on, okay, what is it that you need, that you think you need to have a fulfilling relationship? And then let's start from there. And then where can you ask more from the relationship? And then where can you ask less? I mean, if you look at your grandfather's relationship or even great grandfather's relationship, a lot of times, they would come home from work, and a lot of times maybe they would just go out and they would just be out drinking with the guys, or they would just be out and they would just be hanging out with a lot of the other men, and maybe same with the women, right? The women would kind of get together a little bit more. You find a lot less of that in today's nuclear family. We just don't reach out. We don't have as much community in our relationship. And I think it's one of the biggest opportunities that we have. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but if we can expand our support system for the sake of the marriage, to be able to get internal support, right? We talked about those 3 identities to support each person, the him, the her, and then the union as well. Man, that's when you'll really start to see relationships start to rock and roll, is to know when to ask more from the relationship and then where to ask less. But it's really tricky. Mm-hmm. It's really tricky because we've just we're just kind of we move to that direction, right? The suburbs and everything else just really isolates us. And if you've ever traveled actually to, say, third world countries, we spent a month in Vietnam. We lived with a family for a little bit. You'll go to their house, or you'll go to the business that they work at, a noodle shop, and it's like 4 generations of family members just all mixed together. And we've lost a lot of that. And so I'm not saying that's what we need to bring in, but if we can get outside support, that really helps a relationship, especially if you have kids.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Date night. You need a babysitter.
Right. Yeah. Right. And a babysitter shouldn't be that hard to get. And it used to not be that hard to be able to have someone, connect with your kids and, find someone and to be able to go do something with your mate. But now it's like a task, right? Now it's like a task. Just another thing to put into your things to-do list, right? It's it's tough. It's tough.
I love using things. That's my favorite tool.
It's a beautiful tool. Yep.
So, what would be an example of a huge leap forward that you made, you and your wife made in your marriage, where you jumped levels in this video game of life?
That's an interesting question. I think our biggest thing is coming up with core values for the relationship, putting a specific weight on what that means for us. And I'll give you an example. So we have certain core values in our relationship. One of them is that we take full accountability for our own actions in the relationship, right? And that takes away the blame game. What is really important to us? And so we really got clear on freedom, being able to feel free in the relationship and whatever that happens to mean, in that's to be able to get on the same page of our core values. So I'll go back to freedom. Freedom for us is this feeling of, I want to actually feel more free that I'm in a relationship than if I'm single. And I'm not talking about sleeping with other people or dating other people. It's not about that. It's about, can I still feel free to pursue my passions, the things that light me up, and have support in the relationship that the relationship container itself will support that. Once we kind of really got clear on that, our relationship just really started to up level, because we're like, wow, okay, great. I don't have to do this for you, but man, you love to do this and you love to do this. How can I help you? And what that does is, when you're able to like bring in those passions and optimize yourself in these areas that are outside, you get to bring a fuller piece. I get to bring a fuller Scott into the relationship. And that was really huge. I brought this up before in my podcast, but me and my wife we had just started dating for maybe about 8 months. And I was just about to start this 1-year counseling certification program. And I had always really wanted to learn Spanish. I was struggling with it, just learning at like night school. And I'm like, oh, this is my opportunity to be able to have a few months before this program starts. I'd love to go to Costa Rica and immerse myself to learn the language for 3 months and to take off from a relationship where we're pretty hot and heavy. That's a big ask. And she was just like, wow, every time that you talk about learning this, you light up. And yes, that would be a little bit difficult for me to have you leave for that long. But I want to support you in that. And I'm a big yes to that. And so she let me go, and it was an amazing experience. Halfway through it, I flew her down there, and we had a couple of weeks in Costa Rica together. And then she went home, and that's just a really great example of being able to feel really free in the relationship. So we got really clear on our needs, and we created kind of like a core value, like what a company would do for our marriage. Or at that time, it was just for a relationship.
Wow. So are you fluent in Spanish now?
Oh, so I got conversational, and then I haven't been using it that often. So, I mean, I can get by, but it's actually gotten a little bit worse, but I can get by. I will say though, I did up level. By the time I left Costa Rica, I can remember this very distinctively. I was in the cab, I was going to the airport, and I was talking to the taxi cab driver in Spanish. And I made my first like real good joke in Spanish, and he laughed, and I was like, oh, I was like, that was a moment of pride. That was a moment of pride that I had.
Awesome. Well, I know we're up to time here. So if our listener wants to up level their marriage or intimate relationship, of course, they should check out your retreat and your program, the Self-Actualized Marriage. So that's at self-actualizedmarriage.com.
That's it. Yep, exactly. And that's an easy way to get a hold of me if they're interested about the retreat or working one-on-one with me.
Yeah. And if they wanted to maybe pick one book to start with, or one resource, whether it's a YouTube video or article or whatever, to kind of get them going with improving their relationship, where would you send them?
So if you're just getting started on this path, I would probably say Mating in Captivity with Esther Perel is a really good one. The All or Nothing Marriage, of course, is great with Eli Finkel. It can get a little bit heavy on the numbers and then like the scientific research of it, but both of those are really great.
You got a book coming out anytime soon?
I don't. No, I'm way too. So I've got, as you know, I've got a 6-month-old, and I'm sorry. Did I say 6 months? Almost 5 months. And that's been taking up all my time. And I've been really deliberate about not bringing too many things on, because I really want to take this parental leave to really focus on him. My word this year is nurture, and I really, really want to be there and nurture that experience. So I'm being very selective on what I bring into my plate. So I'm good with the retreat and some of these other projects that I have going on, but a book is not quite on the horizon.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big project.
Yeah.
I can speak from experience. Yeah. Awesome. Well, and if somebody wanted to work with you on a one-on-one coaching or counseling basis, where should they go for that?
Go to self-actualizedmarriage.com. That's the best way if you want to have a conversation to see if working together is a fit. I don't work with everyone, but if it's in alignment, I'm more than happy to have that discussion with you. But that's the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome. And you have a podcast as well.
I do. And like I said, I took that parental leave, and that starts wrapping up again in February. And that'll be about the 6-month mark. And that's exactly what I promised myself. But that is at masteringfulfillment.com. Again, masteringfulfillment.com. And we talk a lot about the same subjects as what you talk about on your podcast, just optimization, but we tend to focus a little bit more on relationships, but it's a really fun discussion.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes, of course. And yeah, this was fun and very inspiring. You've got a great thing going with your marriage and with you sharing with your tribe, all the learnings and wisdom and lessons and all that. That's awesome. So keep up the great work.
Thank you, Stephan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience. It's been a real honor and pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, listener. Get out there, make it a beautiful week, do something surprising and awesome for your loved ones, whether you have an intimate partner or not. Do something for somebody that you love, and we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.